Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Buyer Insights and Intelligence series. My name is Andrew Gaffney. I'm editorial director with Demand Gen Report. We're glad you could join us. We've got a great week-long agenda of content for you, kicking off with today's session. We're going to be looking at the foundational topic of buyer personas, and today's title and topic is Putting Personas to Work, Turning Buyer Insight into Powerful Action. We want to make this session and all the sessions in the series as interactive as possible, so we encourage you to share any comments, questions, or items you like on social media. We'll be following the hashtag BII17 and ask you if you can include that in anything that you post on Twitter or LinkedIn. And there's also handles for some of the speakers involved in today's session if you want to include that as well. Our rewarding registrants and attendees as part of the series, each day we'll have a lucky winner that will get a free pass to our B2B Marketing Exchange event in Arizona, which is becoming a very hot ticket. So you'll get entry points for every session that you register for and also when you attend live. So keep an eye out if you might be one of the lucky winners on a daily basis. The series is hosted by Demand Gen Report. If you're not already a subscriber to Demand Gen Report, we encourage you to join more than 45,000 of your peers, marketing executives who are taking advantage of our weekly newsletter. We cover trends in performance marketing. We also produce proprietary research that you'll have access to, as well as thought leadership series like the one you're involved in today. I also encourage you to join our social media group on LinkedIn, which is Demand Gen Specialists. A lot of great conversations going on there as well. Using the On24 platform for the series in today's session, we would encourage you to type in any questions that you have for our speaker. Today's session will last about 30 minutes, and then we'll save time for question and answers. We'll save about 10 to 15 minutes to try to address as many questions as we can. You can type your questions right in the question tab. There's also a place where you can monitor Twitter stream. There's also be a number of related resources on today's topic that you can go and further research. Also, frequently asked questions. Today's session is being recorded. All registrants will get access to a link to go back and view it on demand or share it with their peers. So we prompted to take a quick survey. We'd appreciate if you could take just a minute or two to fill that out. That feedback really helps us make sure that the content in the series is useful and beneficial. So any feedback you have is really appreciated and welcomed. So please take a minute to do that. Great speaker, really very well qualified to address today's topic. Tim Cook is Vice President of Client Services and a partner with MX Group. He leads MX Group's Client Services and Demand Generation departments. Tim has more than 25 years of B2B marketing experience. Prior to MX Group, Tim held senior marketing positions at global outsourcing firm Convergys and served clients at McCann Erickson and Resource Marketing. Tim works with leading B2B organizations including GE, Cox Automotive, and Siemens. And he's conducted dozens of persona research and development initiatives for a wide array of clients. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody, and thank you for joining us on our webinar to talk about personas this morning. It's a great topic and one that I'm particularly passionate about, and so I thought we could start off today's discussion with just a very simple high-level definition of what is a buyer persona, and then we'll get into quite a bit of detail and meat about how you can look to make them operational within your organization. So simple definition to start off with for buyer personas. Buyer personas tell you what customers think, do, want, and need as they weigh their options. Their own words reveal the questions, concerns, and proof that you will need to address in order to win their business. Personas, there's a lot of research out there that talks about what personas can do for your sales and marketing organizations and your sales and marketing efforts and for your business at large. And so today's focus is not really to sell you on the potential benefits of personas. I'm guessing that many of you have joined us today because you might be interested in taking some next steps around personas. But just to reinforce that with a couple of very quick stats that pay off really what personas can do for you from a couple of different third-party sources. So companies that beat sales goals in general are 2 times as likely to have formally documented personas. when you look at creating content, persona-based content tends to increase engagement 6 times more so than non-persona driven content when going after new opportunities or cold leads. And when you use personas to drive your content development, you look at things like open rates for emails increasing up to 5 times because of the resonance of that content that's created from those personas. So you're sold, you're bought in, you're ready to take some next steps either in developing personas for your organization or looking to operationalize some personas that you already have in place. So let's talk about what we're going to cover in today's session. 30 minutes will go very quickly, so we're going to try to hit quite a few different angles on personas and how to put them in place and how to leverage them for your efforts. First, we're going to talk about 5 do's and 3 don'ts for creating effective buyer personas, if that's where you are right now. It's just looking at getting some personas created and done. We're also going to talk about getting marketing and sales aligned and on the same page when it comes to how to leverage personas across both organizations. We're going to talk about how personas can and should drive some of the media choices that you're looking to make for your marketing organization. We're going to talk about how to use personas and the insights coming out of personas to develop campaigns and to inform your campaign development. And then we're going to talk about engagement content. So a lot of us as marketers are increasingly tasked with building content across the buyer cycle and going much deeper into the buyer cycle than we ever have before. Personas are a very powerful and effective way to align and boost what you're looking to do around your engagement content efforts. All right, so for those of you that might just be getting started with creating personas, developing personas, let's start off with 5 do's as you engage in that process. So the first piece of advice that we would have is to base your personas on primary research, that you really need to talk to real buyers in this process. The reason for that is it's always very informative when you go out and start talking to actual prospect, actual customers, actual buyers, and you quickly realize that we as marketers are not our buyer, and the thing that we think does and should matter to them in their buy cycle is oftentimes really not what matters to them in their buy cycle. So in order to avoid the echo chamber that sometimes happens when we only look within our own organizations to develop personas, and in order to avoid focusing on what matters to us as people that are putting out a product or a solution in the market and what matters to our sales cycle, in order to shift that and really understand what matters to buyers and their buy cycle, the most effective personas are based on primary research from getting out there and talking to real buyers. Our next piece of advice when people are looking to create personas is to think about upfront the profiles of the companies and the people that you'll be personifying in this process. They fundamentally matter to the output of your process here. And something that we see people forget a lot is to really think about recency. So if you're going to identify some people at companies that have engaged with you in a sales cycle or have purchased from you, and you want to have a discussion with them about their mindset at that time and the things that matter to them, it's important to think about how recently, from their perspective, they engaged in that process with you. Why is that? Why are these things important? Thinking about the profile. So, for example, when you think about you might sell your products and solutions into small companies or mid-sized companies or large companies, you might focus on industry A versus industry B. And you might think about how those things combine to form different segments that you target. The insights that matter to a large company in one particular industry might be very different from the buy process and the buy insights that matter to somebody sitting in a small size or mid-sized company in another industry. So sitting down and really teasing those things apart and thinking about up front who are the profiles, the right profiles of the people that we should be talking to, and have they been engaged in a buy cycle recently enough that they're going to remember their mindset at that time, are very critical when you're putting together your persona research list. The second thing that we would say here about the profile piece is that ultimately you're doing this to really drive the business forward. You want to make sure that the segments that you're identifying, the profiles of the people within those segments, really do align fundamentally with what the business is focused on and what matters from a sales prioritization perspective as well. So when we think about how to go about prioritizing segments, just a little bit of additional advice and detail there before we get on to the third thing to do. So ultimately, prioritization here is largely about where you're going to get the biggest bang for your marketing buck. Think about what the sales targets and goals are. Think about sales readiness. There's probably not a lot of benefit to going out and doing personification within an industry that you don't have salespeople set up to support right now, or for a product in the solution where you might not have sales readiness, or a geography where you might not have sales readiness. Also think about marketing readiness. So will you have the marketing resources, the dollars, the budget, the plans to really go out and activate the particular market that you're personifying within a reasonable time frame so that you'll be able to pay off that research initiative. And then fundamental tactical readiness. Do you have things like a database of prospects for you to go after, for example? So getting really practical about where you're prioritizing can make sure that when you come to the end of a research initiative, that you can then start to activate that research initiative and do the things that are going to drive results for you in the marketplace. When we work with clients around this issue of identifying and prioritizing the profiles, we get very specific with the people that we work with. We sit down with our sales and marketing leadership. We identify industries down to SIC and employee sizes and however they might target their markets and however they might segment their markets. We get this down on paper, and then we have a very collaborative discussion with them across the sales and marketing organization so that everybody is aligned about where we're going to go out, where we're going to focus, where we're going to prioritize research efforts against developing personas. The next piece of advice that we would offer in the form of a do here is to think about using a proven persona interview process, a proven persona interview methodology when you go out and do these persona interviews. And then when you're in the midst of them, to really listen a lot more than you talk when you're conducting these interviews. The reason for adopting a methodology and interview approach is that it's very critical to stay on track in that interview. These interviews go very fast. The time that you have with the people on the phone, their time is valuable and that time goes very quickly. And so in order to get the information that you need to produce an effective persona, to get the information that ultimately matters and to maximize that time with people when you have them on the phone, it really helps to have a very structured approach to how you're going to guide that discussion and how you're going to conduct that call. So as an example, there are several different methodologies, approaches out there. We here at the MX Group, when we do these types of research initiatives and persona development projects, we have adopted a research methodology and a research methodology that's published by the Bayer Persona Institute. They have an interview methodology called the 5 Rings of Insight, where we use this to move through a discussion with a prospect or with a buyer and in a way that enables us to really get to the most critical parts of what their buy process was, what mattered to them in that process in a very structured and regimented way, so that when we come to the end of that conversation and the time that we have with them, we've really gathered all the critical information that we need to produce an effective persona. The next do that we have here that we would recommend is to avoid what we call the product solution feedback trap if you are interviewing current customers, people that have made the decision to purchase from you as part of your research initiative. So what do we actually mean by the feedback trap? When you're talking to current customers, they have been using your product and using your solution for some time, their natural inclination is going to be to want to talk about how that is going for them and to give you ultimately what amounts to feedback on either the product or their relationship with your organization. While that type of feedback is incredibly valuable in other arenas of your business, such as product development or for product management or for things like Net Promoter Score types of research initiatives, or really to give you an understanding of how your clients and customers are feeling about you, it is not particularly useful or insightful for developing buyer personas, in which what you really fundamentally need is to really understand the buy cycle. What was in their minds at that time? What they were focused on when they were trying to make a purchase decision. So when conducting these interviews with customers in particular, it's an important trap to try to avoid in those discussions. And ultimately what we do when we're conducting these types of interviews with customers is take them back to the mindset that they had when they were first looking to make a decision, make a buying purchase, and really focus the conversation using a methodology that we talked about a second ago to walk them through that and really avoid and sidestep the feedback trap, which can be a bit of a head fake for people when they are conducting this type of research. It's incredibly interesting to hear what their feedback is on you and your products and your services and your organization. However, it's not particularly useful for developing personas. And then the final do here of the 5 that we prepared for today's discussion is when putting together your list of the people that you're going to talk to within a particular segment is to include a mix of both stalled out and or lost opportunities as well as won opportunities in your research. So what we mean by stalled out are people that engaged with you, with your salespeople in a buy cycle, but for whatever reason never progressed all the way through to either something that you could identify as won or identify as lost. I think lost probably is self-explanatory, so people that engaged with you and your sales team but ultimately decided to not work with you, as well as those people that you ultimately won in that process. The reason for that is that you will learn just as much, if not more, from those buyers that ultimately decided to not do business with you as those that decided to do business with you. Okay, so that's 5 do's. So now let's talk about 3 don'ts in engaging in doing development of personas. So the first piece of advice that we would have is don't forget about the persona template format itself. Why is that important? Because it's critical to make sure that your ultimate persona template, the deliverable that you're going to produce, gives your teams the information that they're going to need to be effective. And also it's important to ensure that the research approach that you're using is ultimately going to provide the information that you need to populate that template. So what we've seen a lot of times when some of the folks that we work with engage in a research initiative on their own and they haven't done this type of research before is they conduct their interviews, the actual persona template that they're going to produce is a bit of an afterthought, and they go back to the interviews, the recordings, the transcripts, and they find that they haven't really asked the questions or have the information that they're going to need in order to populate their template. So in general, there are a lot of different templates out there. We here at the MX Group have a few different templates that we work with depending on the clients that we're working with and what their needs are. But in general, a good buyer persona template is going to include things like the core information about the person themselves, the role of that person and how they connect with your product or solution, things like what we call buy cycle insights, so what they are thinking about, what they're looking for, what kinds of questions that they have at different stages of their buy cycle. And then as you start to think about segmentation for a particular product or solution that you're doing a persona initiative for, are there specific insights that come from segment A versus segment B? So this is just meant to give you an oversimplified example of the types of pieces of information that are critical to a persona. The takeaway for you from today's discussion is to not make your actual persona template if you are engaging in this process either internally or working with some outside support from an outside firm. Don't make the persona deliverable, the template itself, an afterthought to your process. Make sure that you're thinking through that right up front because it will guide your research and should guide your research approach. The next don't that we would have and a recommendation that we would make, and it's a question that we get all the time. How many interviews do we actually need to do? How many people do we need to touch in this process? And our bit of advice for you here is to don't think that you have to boil the ocean with hundreds and hundreds of interviews that need to be conducted against a particular segment. The reason for that is, in our experience, if you have clear, well-defined segments identified for each of the personas that you're going after. So for example, we have identified that we want to talk to this title or this role within this size of organization, within this industry, within this geography. If you've done that work to really define a particular segment that you're personifying, you will find that 5 to 10, and in some cases even 3 to 5 interviews against that clearly defined segment is really going to give you all the information that you need. Where we see people start to get into trouble is when they think that they can do that 3 to 5 or that 5 to 10 against a particular segment and then extrapolate that against every other segment that they serve when those segments may not share characteristics. And then the third and final kind of don't that we would have, and we see this again a lot with a lot of the clients that we work with that are interested in taking some steps with personas, is frankly to not expect that the development of personas, that doing primary research, doing interviews with prospects and customers is or should be an internal core competence. So the reason for that is we see a lot of value in thinking about outsourcing persona development to a firm that does this type of work all the time. They will be more efficient at it, and the second kind of big benefit that we see to internal teams is that that third party brings a lot of objectivity and neutrality to the process. They can be a lot more objective about the information that they're receiving about your products and services and about the buy cycle. And then we also find that when it's a third party talking to customers or prospects, that those people are a lot more willing to be candid and open up and talk about their true experiences because they don't have a fear of being critical or offending the person on the other end of the phone if they know and understand that they are a neutral third party in that process. Okay, so now what? You have done personas, you've taken all our advice, and you've gotten to the point where you have some personas that have been produced, they're ready to go, and you're thinking about what comes next. How am I going to use these? How am I going to leverage them? How am I going to operationalize them within our organization? And know what you want to avoid because we see it all the time. This is a question that we get from a lot of the folks that we work with. They come to us and they say, we've produced these personas, we have them done, they're sitting in a drawer somewhere. Our marketing team isn't using them. Our executives don't see the value in them, and they're certainly not being leveraged and used across our sales organization. So what can you do to avoid that dreaded persona gets done, persona sits in a figurative or literal drawer somewhere and never gets really leveraged across the organization in an effective manner? We want to help you avoid that pitfall. So let's start with sales, and let's start with what you can do to think about how you're going to get sales and marketing organizations on the same persona page in order to leverage these across both sides of the house. So the first bit of advice that we would have when you think about engaging with your partners in the sales organization and getting sales involved is really get realistic about where the organization is today. And what we mean by that is when you think about your sales team, when you think about your partners within the sales organization, Are they ready, able, and equipped to leverage the persona insights in their sales process that you are going to bring back into the organization once they're completed or if they're already done? So what do we mean by ready? A couple of things here. Are they trained on them? Do they understand what they mean? Are they fluent in the language of their personas and the insights that have come out of those personas? And then, last but not least, are they bought in? Are they bought into the concept that they can and should be leveraging this information that's coming out of these personas and adapting their methodology, their approach, their conversations to reflect the information that's contained within their personas? Are they able? And this is a big one. This is a big nut to crack for a lot of the people that we work with. And what this fundamentally means is if you are going to bring back into the organization as a marketer a bit of insight about your buyers and about their pain points and about their needs, how able is the extended sales organization to adjust their approach? So instead of potentially coming into a presentation or a sales discussion or even a first conversation and leading with product or leading with solution, leading with information about who we are as a company, are they able and ready to lead with that bit of insight, that bit of empathy that opens that sales discussion with a bit of insight about the buyer? You might be experiencing things like this. You might have needs like that. Here are some things that might be at play for you within your organization or within your industry. Does that resonate with you? Does that feel like some of the things that you might be struggling with? Let's segue and talk about how we might be able to help you with those issues. So able is a big part of the equation here. And then equipped, right? So some of the pitfalls that we see marketing teams fall into is that they produce that persona template, they publish it on the internet, or they send it out to the sales organization and they kind of high five and think, well, our work here is done. If you truly want the sales organization to adapt their approach, to use that insight, to use that information that's coming out of their personas, you need to think about the tool set that they have and whether that tool set really reflects the really wonderful information that your persona process has unearthed and identified. So sales materials, presentations, talk tracks, all access to that information, the actual personas themselves and how to use them. Have you thought through how you're going to equip the sales team and really think about their extended tool set to reflect the persona work that you have engaged in? So ready, able, and equipped is really critical for getting the sales organization to be able to leverage the persona information that you've developed and brought back into the organization. So as you're maybe taking some steps there, take some mental inventory. Think about the things that you have, your sales process, potentially what your sales training curriculum looks like when you're onboarding new sales reps or bringing new folks in, the presentations, the talk tracks, potentially persona-specific sales tools, the campaign content, the nuts and bolts of your databases. Do those include these persona fields so that when a lead is passed over to sales, they can see what persona group that person falls into and adjust their approach accordingly? The marketing supplied content that you're producing and delivering, does it reflect that persona effort? This is where the rubber hits the road, and this is where you can start to get the sales team to really mobilize and use the information that you've produced for them. And this is just a simple example from a client that we've worked with that's developed personas. This client in particular has a very robust sales portal that is actively used by their sales organization. They have really taken the steps as part of their able and equipped to make sure that persona information is available there and that it's explained and that there's some context provided for it and that there is a wealth of materials available to use and for download by the sales organization against the different sales personas, or the buyer personas that they have identified. The next bit of advice that we'd have here when it comes to getting sales and marketing on the same persona page is to make sure that you understand that this is really not a one and done when it comes to engagement with the sales organization. And so what do we mean by that? You're going to have to roll it out to the sales organization. You're going to have to spend the time to sit down with them, to host webinars, to host conference calls, and really roll out this information for them and how they should be leveraging it. you're going to have to revisit and reinforce that over time. You're going to have to check back in, see if it's working for them, understand why it's not, help guide their efforts accordingly. In that process, we as marketers are going to have to be receptive to their feedback. Are there things that they think would be additionally valuable or more valuable to them? Or what is their feedback when they are road testing some of this insight? And so we have to be receptive to the feedback that they're going to bring back in. And that feedback, is really important to this last point, which is that we're going to have to be willing to revisit these personas as dynamics change. Market dynamics might change, product or solution dynamics might change, the focus of the business might change, and the feedback coming in from the sales organization about these personas themselves could change. So getting out of thinking about these as a one and done, but instead of thinking about them as something that needs to be looked at often, revisited as marketing partners with sales, is a critical step in making sure that they're getting leverage across the sales organization and not simply sitting in that figurative filing cabinet. So then let's also talk about the marketing organization and how making sure that this work gets used and leveraged across what you're trying to do within your marketing team. And I know all of us on the call today have seen this stat or something similar. I know we are all intimately familiar with this concept that so much of the buy cycle now is happening individually, by the buyer, led by the buyer, self-directed by the buyer, and where and how they are willing to engage in a conversation with the salesperson is happening much later in their process. And so that's putting more and more pressure on the marketing organization as producers and owners of content to make sure that the content that we're producing and putting out there, the campaigns that we're doing, are really enabling this much more self-directed buy cycle. So what you're seeing here is a close-up of another part of our persona template here at the MX Group. And you'll see that what we do is, as we go through and have discussions with folks, we understand what their buy cycle looks like at different parts of the buy cycle. We're using that to identify not just content needs, but also the preferred kind of delivery method and purpose of that content as we hear that from the buyers and the prospects that we're talking to. If this is part of the research process, then when you come to the end of it, making sure that you are equipped to better enable those digital touches that we just talked about, that's aligned from a buyer persona perspective, it becomes a lot easier to pay that off because you've already had those types of discussions, you've already thought through some of those content needs as part of the actual persona research and development process. So let's segue a little bit and start to talk about campaign development, high-level messaging, more specific types of demand gen or other types of campaigns, and how persona research can and should be a very critical input into those development of those campaigns. And so I think the biggest symptom of campaigns that do not leverage persona insights is when you start to see campaigns that are very much focused on you as a company and your products and your services, and are really making a lot of claims about how great you are and how wonderful the products are, and putting out communication that's really everything that you know about you and your solution, and even then also putting touch points or conversion options up in front of folks that are not necessarily identifying where they might be in their buy cycle. So from a first touch to, you must be ready to talk to sales right now. It's probably not that much of a surprise to anybody on the call that oftentimes those approaches to marketing are not particularly effective. They're not necessarily particularly effective at resonating with buyers from a messaging point of view, and they're probably not particularly effective from a conversion perspective when you're not giving people a way to get in touch with you and to engage with your organization that reflects where they are in their buy cycle. So how do you take the insights coming from a persona process and make sure that you're staying on track and using that and shifting how you think about producing messaging and campaigns? Some practical bits of advice for all of you on the phone today, have all of your content creators been briefed? Have you thought about your internal teams that drive content creation? Have you thought about your external partners and agencies and others that are responsible for producing campaign and other content for you? And have they been briefed on these personas, and do they understand that they should be using them going forward? Are things like your project and creative briefs that you're producing as a team or in partnership with outside vendors leveraging those insights on a consistent basis? Are you interpreting those insights for every campaign that you do? So it's not enough simply to write a creative brief and attach the persona document to the back of it and say, take a look at that and interpret as you will. The best use of persona insights are interpreting those insights for every campaign that you're producing and really focusing on the things that are most relevant to the development effort at hand, the campaign development effort at hand. And then as you start to evaluate creative and campaign messaging, I think it's important to ask yourself, who's the star of that campaign? Is it you or your buyer? There may be places deeper in the funnel, by the way, when in the solution selection phase where it's wholly appropriate to make your products, your solutions, the star of the show. But when you think about things like top of funnel, where a lot of the marketing effort is, where you're trying to get that initial engagement, you think you'll find, and the research pays it off, that the more that you are making the buyer the star of the show and demonstrating empathy, the more resonant that touch point, that content will be, and the more effective it will be at capturing attention and drawing conversions. Are you establishing empathy and demonstrating understanding of the buyer and their pain points with that campaign messaging and that content? Can you get very specific in that process, or can you only speak in generalities? So a thing that a persona effort does is allow you to get much more specific about the particular connection of a buyer or persona to a product and services and start to get out of talking about generalities. And you'll find that the engagement in that content will pay off the more specific you are able to get. And then certainly last but not least, and most critical to making sure that you're staying on track, are you seeing increased engagement with your content, with your assets, and with your campaigns? The research is there to prove it. We talked a little bit about that earlier. You should be seeing increased engagement if you are leveraging a persona-driven approach. You need to make sure that you have the mechanism and the means in place to really understand how content is performing and whether you're seeing those increases in content engagement. And again, this is something that I think is familiar to a lot of us when you think about getting that content put out there. And it's what we kind of call the content conundrum, right? We are all, as marketers, we understand the importance of content. It's a huge part of our marketing programs. It's probably a big part of our budget. We are putting a lot of effort into creating content. But the flip side of that coin is that we might be seeing that a lot of it's not getting used, and it may not be giving us those results, that increased engagement that we were hoping to see. And then ultimately a lot of it might be not useful, might be going into the wastebasket, might be time and effort not well spent. The biggest cost for that we see is going back to this concept of having those discussions in a research development and a persona development process, is that if that content is created disconnected from what buyers are telling you that they want, that they need, and how they want it in their buy cycle, when you ignore that advice, you ignore it at your own peril. And if you kind of default back to maybe a library of assets that you have, or content that's very much product or solution focused, that doesn't really address and doesn't truly address what different personas say is important to them, that's where you start to see that disconnect between the dollars that you're investing in producing content and then whether that content is really effective at moving the needle from a sales or marketing point of view. So personas will give this to you. Not only will it give it to you on a per persona basis, but then you can start to think about laying out all of your personas that you might be focused on, thinking about the different stages of the buy cycle, and then put together a very effective content plan that will show you maybe content that you do have that might be good as is or might need to be retooled or redeveloped, and then potentially content that you should be thinking about creating across all of those personas, and can give you a practical roadmap for biting that off or targeting it and start to produce that content for those personas that is going to drive that increased engagement. So we're coming up to the end of our time here, and we wanted to leave some time for some Q&A from all of you and to hear from you on the phone today. So we'll just end you, I think, just a final kind of bit of thought for all of you that might be in different stages of engaging in a persona development process. Fundamentally, what this is really all about is bringing your buyers into sharper focus for your extended organization, really getting out there, talking to them, understanding what it is that matters to them and what they need. And if you engage in that type of process, it can really pay huge dividends for you as a marketer, for your partners in sales, and for your organization at large. So with that, we're going to open it up to some questions from the audience.
All right, thanks, Tim. Great insights. I will remind the audience you can go ahead and type in any questions you have. We've already got a couple of good ones in. Also, a quick reminder, you will see a survey prompt. I just, again, wanted to ask anybody to take part in that. Should only take a minute, and we appreciate the feedback. Tim, we've got some good questions coming in already. Nick asked, you talked about training sales and working with sales, what the personas have done. He's asking about what role they should play in the development process. Do they help to define which personas to go after, or what do you say is the best practice there?
Yeah, so a great question, and I think a very critical one to that whole concept of alignment and ensuring that your sales partners are ready, able, and equipped at the end of a development process. So a couple key points here. 100% it is important to make sure that they are in alignment and agreement with you about where you're going to focus your efforts from a segment prioritization perspective, and then also in defining what makes up the profile of the people and the organizations within those segments. You may have already done some of this work if you've engaged in some sales and marketing alignment just in general for your organization to get to things like a common definition of the markets that you're going after, a common definition of a lead, and then ensuring that all of those ducks are in a row, so to speak, as part of that effort. If your organization hasn't taken some of those steps, we find oftentimes that when we meet with clients and we start to have this discussion about sales participation in the process, that the persona development effort starts to point the need to engage in some of those types of alignment discussions with sales to make sure that everybody truly is on the same page around market segmentation, market definition, and then prioritization of persona efforts against those efforts, so that when we come to the end of a persona research initiative and development research initiative, that all of that is working together in content and sales is ready and ready, able, and equipped to take that information and use it as part of their process. The other thing that I would say is, just a final note there, is that sales will have an incredibly valuable perspective on dynamics. So we find oftentimes that when we're doing this type of work that we might spend some time pre-interviewing different folks from the sales organization to flesh out our understanding of what we might be hearing from different prospects and customers when we do get them on the phone, because it gives us a bit of context and shorthand to cut to the heart of the matter. And so we're not doing that to predispose us in those conversations, but we're doing it to help to make sure that we are able to focus on the critical things in those conversations. And oftentimes sales does have a very valuable perspective that gets us to that point faster when we're conducting those types of interviews on the phone.
Okay, great. Your slide and your point about personas ending up in the draw definitely resonated with a few folks. Mark said we've developed personas, but we find that they aren't really getting used. Any suggestions or thoughts on how to get them activated?
Yeah, and I wish I could say that that's not a common challenge, but I do think it is a very common challenge and something that we see a lot. So a couple of things that I would recommend taking a look at. So the first thing I would actually say is take a look at your actual persona itself, pull it out of the drawer, look at the actual deliverable that either you got from a vendor or that you produced, and view it with a lens to some of the things that we talked about today. Is it really getting at buy cycle insights from the buyer's perspective? Is it focused on a particular segment in a meaningful enough way that it's useful against that segment? Has it identified pain points, proof that's required throughout the buy cycle, really identified the process that that person went through? And is it specific? Is it avoiding some of those generalities, right? If you have a persona document or template that says things like, we really care about reliability, or we really care about innovation, or service is really important to us, chances are you might have a persona that's not well executed and is not going to be particularly useful for you or for the sales organization. And so you might actually need to look at that and think about redoing some of that work, or going back to the research and seeing if it can be retooled to produce a persona that is actually of value. Then the second thing I would say is, let's say you pull it out of the drawer and you look at it and you say, you know what, we really do feel like this is good. There's a lot of really critical buy cycle insight in here that we think is incredibly valuable. It's just not getting used. Then I would sit back and kind of look through what was your ready, able, equipped plan within the sales organization, and then when you look within the marketing organization, have you done some of those things that we talked about to really make sure that your extended teams are aware, understand, have internalized, and have built into their process how to use these things, and that maybe you as a marketing leader have established the expectation and the mandate that people are to use these personas and leverage them across their efforts and really help them really understand what that means. So if your marketing organization, for example, has really always been focused with producing data sheets or product-focused collateral, it might be new for some of the people on your team to think about how they should leverage your persona insight to create, for example, an empathy-focused headline for an email, or an empathy-focused opening paragraph for an email that you're sending out that focuses on the buyer and their needs, and then uses that to segue to talk about you or your products and solutions. So those are a couple of things that we would take a look, or suggest taking a look at. The actual persona itself, is it of quality and therefore should be being used? And if the answer to that is yes, then what have you done looking across the extended organization to ensure readiness, use, understanding of how those things should be put in place?
Okay, great. A question from Claire. You talked about making sure that personas are refreshed and updated on a fairly regular basis. She's asking for how often. Like, is that an annual basis, or do you want to see best practices or suggestions around that?
Yeah, so I wish I could tell you that there's a one-size-fits-all answer to that question. There's not. What I will tell you is that if you are serving a more mature market that is maybe not as subject to changing dynamics or new entrants, new products coming in, seismic types of changes, then you're probably able to stretch that out a bit over time. If you are, and so you may find that your persona actually works even longer than a year. It also will depend on some of the feedback that's coming in from the folks that are leveraging those personas for their efforts. If you are looking at personas that might be targeted at an emerging or new market that's still pretty immature, maybe has some volatility to it, or a product or a solution that maybe is newer to your organization or represents a growth opportunity for your company that you're very much focused on, you might find that the dynamics at play there are changing, shifting enough that it might be more than once a year. You might actually need to go back and kind of understand what's happening and touch the market more frequently than that. I will also say, though, that if that is the case, you might find that you don't have to bite off the whole thing that you did up front. So let's say you did 5 to 10 interviews for a segment, and maybe you did 3 to 4 segments, so you did a total of 30 to 40 to 50 or whatever interviews as part of that process. You might find that going out and kind of touching your segments, doing 1 or 2 here on a more ongoing basis, or even thinking about fielding potentially an e-based survey versus an interview process, gives you enough of a touch with that type of a changing segment to feel confident that your personas are keeping pace with how things are shifting or changing within that type of an industry segment.
Okay, great. All right, we're going to take one more question. We're getting close to time here. Laura said she's just getting started with personas She said she's very early stage, and she wanted to know if there's any expectations you could help her prepare for, any recommendations on how long it should take, or anything just as we prepare her organization.
Yeah, so I think a good general rule of thumb is at minimum you're looking at a good month or two, in some cases 3 months, to get these things done. And a big driver of that, frankly, is the time that it's going to take to get on people's calendars the prospects and the customers that you need to interview. So when you think about kind of the upfront pieces, making sure that everybody's on the same page about how you're gonna prioritize. If those alignment pieces are already in place for your organization, then you're ahead of the game. If they're not, and you feel like there's a lot of disconnect between marketing and sales on defining segments and defining the profiles within those segments, then you're going to need to allow some time to get through that, and that can take a couple of weeks to get through. Then when you think about conducting the actual interviews, if you're doing this work in-house, for example, you're trying to fit that into a lot of competing priorities that you have, and then you're also, working with the interview subjects' competing priorities. So that can add some time. If you're looking to condense that time frame, I think looking to potentially go outside, we talked about this earlier, and thinking about outsourcing that is probably a way to drive that to get done a bit faster. So if you're struggling with some of the alignment issues, a third party can come in, bring some structure, bring a framework to how to have those critical discussions that can shorten the time frame there. And then typically they will have other resources that you might not have to get actual interviews scheduled, probably good solid blocks of time to conduct those interviews in a more condensed time frame. And then they're just more familiar with how to take that information, take that data that's coming out of that, and translate it into an actual persona. They're probably going to be able to get that done faster for you. So if you're looking in-house, you might be more in that 3 to 4 month time frame. If you're looking to go outside and bring an outside vendor in, oftentimes you might see that time get cut in half.
Okay, great. All right, we're just about out of time. So Tim, I want to thank you. This was great, really good suggestions and actionable things I think that our audience can take away, and a really great kickoff to the series. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, I want to remind you the next session in the series is going to be more about buyers of people and not accounts. We'll give you some suggestions for key steps to defining and engaging target prospects. So good follow-up to today's discussion. Hope you can take part in that and keep an eye out for the full menu of sessions that will be taking place all week. You can view them on demand if you can't catch them live, and make sure to share them with your peers. So thanks for attending, everybody. Have a great day, and thanks again to Tim.